Channel. My name is Jacob Restituto, and I have the huge honor of having Josh Cumbee here on the channel. So thank you so much for taking the time, man. I think it's going to be a really, really interesting conversation. I know that a lot of people are excited for this conversation, so thank you for taking the time.
Oh no, dude. It's truly an honor to be here, and I love getting into the weeds on all things nerdy, all things music. So let's go, man. I'm excited.
Absolutely. Well, first off, I want to compliment your studio. So if I let me see if I could zoom out for a second so that everybody can see the full screen of yours because you got a cool studio going on over here. Here we go. There we go. Like to see a full studio, it's pretty cool, man. Like you got some cool gear going on.
Yeah,
So,
it's funny because I'm mostly in the box,
mm,
but like there's a few I like being able to manipulate what's in the box a lot of different ways. And so like a lot of what's on the desk here is stuff that's controlling software,
sure.
but it's physical. Like I have like the PreSonus Atom SQ that I love, and the Soft Tube Console One down here, which is incredible. And I actually use a pin tablet, like a Wacom stylus, rather than a mouse.
Really interesting. I had been debating that for a long time. That's funny. That's cool. I
Yeah,
and that the
so
the fader thing that you were talking about. I forgot what was the name of that thing.
the
The
Soft Tube
Yeah, the
Console
soft
One.
tube. Yeah, so the control. I've been looking into that for a while too. But what do you use Ableton or do you use Logic?
Man, I'm actually in PreSonus Studio
Okay.
One.
Okay, so that's why that works so well. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
very
yeah.
interesting. Cool. So for people that aren't, we're going right into it. But for people that aren't familiar with who you are and what you're up to, can you give a little backstory on who you are and the things you've done?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a gigantic musical accident, and a grateful one. Uh, I started my working. I went to USC for music business. I had no idea you could make a living making music,
Mm,
not the slightest clue. I interned for free, getting people coffee, and that led me to a licensing space on the business side for about a year. From there, via Craigslist, I met super producer Toby Gad, which is insane because and Toby's responsible for songs like All of Me for John Legend, Big Girls Don't Cry, like If I Were a Boy, songs that you hear and you're like, how did a human being write this? Like Toby wrote those songs.
sure.
So I met him on Craigslist because he was looking for like an assistant engineer, and all the stars aligned. I ended up working with him for half a decade and went from being his assistant to him mentoring me. We produced Madonna together, and that started this whole cascade of insanity. And all of a sudden, I was working with all these amazing artists, and out of that, I ended up doing a feature with Armin van Buren, the DJ, and that unbelievably exploded and went number one in the Netherlands and launched my artist career. And now here we are.
It is so wild. And the face, you should have seen my face when you said that it's from Craigslist because I spoke to somebody yesterday and he got his start on Broadway, dancing on Broadway and in the Heights with Lin Manuel Miranda and all that whole that I mean the whole thing right now from a Craigslist ad. It's like who even knew that Craigslist was still relevant? I mean, you mentioned that was a while ago, and it was a couple years. It was a while. It was about 10 years ago for him, but still, it's like that is that the irony of that is not lost on me. That is such a crazy story.
I think there's something magical about Craigslist because let's just all call a spade a spade. There's a lot of kind of junky stuff going on Craigslist.
Sure.
So it sort of creates space where if you are at least hardworking and like want to be good at your craft, it puts you in like a rare category. So if somebody's making the mistake of running a dragnet on Craigslist, which is fun and entertaining in and of itself, and then somebody comes along that's like, hey, wow, this person actually wants to work hard
Mm.
and isn't like, collecting dolls in their basement. Not against anybody who likes to do that, but just saying, I think it really differentiates you.
Yeah, absolutely. That is so fascinating. So you start with him, then you kind of started kind of just at the, started from the bottom. Now we're here, right? The quote
Exactly.
break.
Exactly. A little bit
What
above the bottom.
one of the few songs that you didn't write though, man. I was looking at your song, like your discography song credit list, and it is there was like 100 songs on there that like everybody would know. Working with like even in the description of this video, like working with Kygo, working with Madonna, Janet Jackson, Hilary Duff, Alex and Sierra, and then some more recent names is like Sabrina Carpenter, Olivia Rodrigo, like names that everybody knows and songs everybody knows, man. Which is like how do you go from getting coffee to now writing some of the most popular songs of the year at the time?
I mean, for me, the mentality is I love that Bruce Lee quote, be like water. I think he was talking about fighting and like how you always have to adapt to each situation and fill the space that you're given. But I take it as kind of a way to approach opportunity and think about, like, at the end of the day, I'm fueled by my love for music. And I didn't even think I was going to make money in music. I just wanted to be in the business so I could be close to it. So as opportunities came, it was like, you know, when I started working for Toby, it was, hey, you have this record label project that you're doing. You have these artists. Maybe I can produce songs for them, like covers for YouTube. And Toby was like, yeah, sure. Why not? Go for it. Like, it's not something that he's thinking, I want to do this. I'm not coming in saying, oh, I get to do what you do because he does what he does. I'm saying, what can I do that you don't want to do that looks a little bit like what you do, but isn't going to impinge like on what you're doing in any way, you know?
Sure. That's fascinating. And then it's just one day at a time. How long have you been in the industry for?
Man, I got my first job in the industry about a decade ago, actually. And I signed my first publishing deal in 2016. So that was 5 years.
So for the people that aren't super familiar with that, can you explain what that means?
Yeah, I think a lot of people look at publishing deals as kind of like the grail of like, I'm an official songwriter, producer, whatever. I got a publishing deal. And it's not that, but it's a helpful benchmark as far as like publishing companies will give you money up front and advance on your future royalties. Say, hey, you can go dedicate your life to this, spend all your time making music, and we're confident you'll make the money back. And hopefully you do. So
that's
a
great explanation of it. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I just look at that as like the first kind of moment where I was like, okay, now, you know, I've got X amount of years of runway from this. I don't have to be working, you know, 8 hours a day as an assistant and then 6 hours a day after that making, you know, music at night. I can do it all.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so encouraging. And I love the fact that you said that you didn't know you can make money out of it. And that is one of the, you know, I'm not sure if I've mentioned this in the original email where I reached out to you. But that's kind of the goal of these conversations that I have with people is like, you know, for so long, so many people told me that it wasn't possible to do anything in the music industry. You know, I have this one random story from a person. I used to wear so many hats, you know, trying to make ends meet, right?
Yeah.
At the time, I was working at an art gallery, and I met this one random person came into the art gallery, and they were like, "Oh, what do you do?" kind of thing, like outside of, you know, like this. I was like, "Oh, I'm a musician." She didn't know me from Adam, and she's like, "Oh, I'm sorry," and I'm like, "You don't know me from anybody," and it's like comments like that, they just like compound. It's like now, you know, that things have worked out. It's become my full-time job. Like I want to encourage other people that may not have the encouragement that I might have had from like my parents or something like that, or my wife. You know, that it is actually possible if you are willing to put in a stupid amount of work and a decent amount of time, you know?
Yeah, and if you don't have a certain egotistical attachment to what your career in music looks like. And I've seen a lot of people, I think, misstep in this regard where they consider themselves above something. Like it's so funny to think about now, but like go back to when I first signed my first publishing deal with BMG. Shout out to Andrew Gould and Zach Katz and all those people, Thomas Scher, great humans. They were sending some of the songs I was working on to like Korea. And at the time, this was pre-BTS. There were writers, and I'm not naming names, but there were writers who were like, I don't want a Korean song. You know, like it's not the US market. Sure. Not that they had anything against Korea, but they were just looking at it thinking, I don't want to get cuts in this country because it's not Ariana Grande. And if it's not Ariana Grande, I don't want it. And I think a lot of those people really disadvantaged themselves because they missed that serendipity that happens when you are humble and allow your music to be everywhere.
Exactly. Absolutely. Humility is such a big aspect of it, man. And doing some certain gigs, and I'm sure you have the stories, like doing the craziest gigs, like, you know, like I told a story yesterday to the person I was talking to that I played one of my first gigs. There was nobody in the bar, and it was so empty that the bartender went into the back. So I was literally playing for no one for 2 hours, and I'm like... But it's like you look back and it's like, wow, I can't believe I did this stuff. But like those are the building blocks to, you know, like you mentioned, like you put in your work and stuff. And absolutely, so that is so funny, and I couldn't agree more. So how does the relationship, like how do you build relationships in the sense of like where do you start? Where you starting with these songs, you're writing these songs for people, you're working with Toby. How does something today, like, you know, you land a songwriting thing or with Olivia Rodrigo or, you know, Madonna, like does that do you just write the song and then pitch it out to people, or how does that work?
To some degree, and I would say it definitely varies based on the project and on the climate. And candidly, I think right now it's a little bit harder to pitch songs in the US than it ever has been. Partially because I think with COVID, a lot of artists quarantined down with like one or two
Mm,
creatives, and we're like, okay, I'm going to do a body of work with this person. And because I think a lot of what fuels demand for our craft is artists on tour who don't have the time to sit down and write 30 songs and pick the best 10. So they depend on this outside machine. And since tours were canceled, it really, I think, put a strain on that system. So I'd say
that's
right
really
now,
interesting.
I've been trying to evaluate it because the business is always changing,
Sure,
and also we've got the other side of things too, where people are learning to produce and to create, which is
sure.
amazing. But it definitely waters down or I guess it expands the pool to the point where now you've got a lot more people making. And then the question is, are the judges at the checkpoints judging things based on the absolute goodness of the work or based on the ease of access or expense? You know?
Sure. Yeah, that is really interesting. What do you think? What defines a good song for you? Like, being that you've written so many that so many people know, or you at least worked on with some. Actually, what does that process look like before we even go to that? Like, how much when you co-write a song, or have credits on the song, how much of is it actually you versus another person versus another person? Like, do you guys have writing pools, or how does that work?
That's a great question. I mean, it depends. COVID really changed a lot of workflows
Sure,
where a
sure.
lot of things went offline. Like traditionally, it's always like, I'll invite in a songwriter or a songwriter and an artist or whoever, as many people, and we all sit in a room together. We talk about life for an hour or two, and then somebody says that one thing, and you're like, oh my God, we should write a
Yeah,
song about that.
yeah.
And then you follow this little thread, hoping there's a sweater at the end, and you go down all these little rabbit holes and end up in a place of pure misery. And if you can just tolerate the misery long enough, there's a song on the other side, almost always.
I couldn't agree more with that statement. Every song I've ever produced or like written, because I produce my own music, so like every song, like I write the song, I start producing the song, and then there's that point where you're like, I hate this with every core of my being, and it's right after you break through that everything just like flows like a river. It's like, oh, now that song's coming along, but you got to push through that exact point. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, and I think part of it's you get tired of listening to what you did, and you kind of feel like you've exhausted all the options. You don't know where to go
Sure.
at that point. And then the other side is like there's this continual war in your mind, I think, between the creative and the critical, and they can't
Sure.
exist simultaneously. But the faster you oscillate between them, the more exhausted you get. So you sort of hit this point of exhaustion where you're trying to critique this, like, look, is this good? Is this going to
Mm.
work? Does this have commercial appeal? Blah blah blah. And the creative's going like, dude, just shut up and have fun. And
Hmm.
these things are at war, and they eventually tire each other out. And that's what I think really have to work through every time.
Yeah, that is really interesting. So leading it back to that original question of what makes a good song, but before that is, I'm curious because a lot well people often see the glorious side of things, but they don't see the work that's put in. So I'm curious, like you have the huge list of songs that a lot of people know. How many have you written, or can you estimate how many you've written, or even released like through writing and stuff that never really got with the glory? You know what I mean?
I mean, it's funny because I've talked to a lot of people about this ratio, this exact ratio, and um, gosh, for me, it's probably got to be 5 unreleased songs for every one released, maybe
Okay,
six.
okay.
And I'm pretty proud of that ratio. Um,
I think
I,
that's a great. That's actually better than I thought it was going to be. Like, so that's actually really impressive.
I mean, I'm averaging it over time. Like at the beginning, it was
Sure,
insane. It was one
of
for every
course.
50,
Yeah.
and I don't even count those songs. Because it took a long time to even learn to the point where I kind of knew what I was doing. Not that I know what
Hmm.
I'm doing. Um, but I've talked to a lot of other writers, and it seems like even the guys at like the top of the game, the guys who you think, man, this guy could, rub a violin bow on a tire, and somebody'd be like, that's a hit song. Like those people are still 3 out of 10, maybe four
Sure.
out of 10 songs get cut. Like the failure ratio is really high, even at
Hmm.
the top. It's like baseball.
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely. Some of the best batters up there had like a 3.5 ratio, a 0.35 ratio. Like so
Yeah,
that's a great analogy actually.
yeah.
So now from that being so, if you maybe one out of every five or six that you write, what makes that one like the hit song, the good song? What's a hit song for you?
Uh, I mean, there's a couple different checkpoints. There's the first checkpoint is goodness for me, And part of me will never be satisfied with a song. And every time a song comes out, I'm like, ugh, I could have done 300 things better now that I'm
100%.
Spotify, you know? And you have to make peace with the
Absolutely.
horribleness of that experience. But I do look for like those goosebump moments. And I always try to think like while I'm listening back to the song after I've written it and I'm kind of auditing it, think, am I bored? Am I
Mm.
interested? Is this getting past my psychological barriers and getting into my like soul and my emotion in a way? And if there's that moment where I think it's called frisson, it's like the goosebumps that you get from music, like the physical response to an auditory stimulus, then I'm like, okay, for me, that's as good as I can do.
Hmm.
That's a hit for me. And then from there, there's this Harvard study that talks about intellectual property that my friend Fernando Garibay told me about. And the premise or the discovery of the study was that the goodness of a product, like the successfulness, is 10% the quality of the product and 90% the network that has to be activated to distribute it. So
Interesting.
all we can do is control that 10% and make it as good as it can be. And then from there, it has to be the artist has to be in love
Mm.
with it. And the label has to be in love with it. And the distributor and the radio people and the localized people and the PR people in each territory. Like it takes so much to make a hit. And all you can do is control that 10%, you know?
Hmm. Absolutely. That is really interesting because you said, like you said, the because how many songs have we heard from like guys at like coffee shops? You're like, oh my gosh, this is a brilliant song, but that's a 10%, but the 90% is the marketing that never, you know, was fulfilled in it. You know what I mean? That is really interesting. It's kind of, I think the same debate could be for an artist too. You know, like maybe 10%, 20% is actual talent. The rest is marketing and likability and relationships and work ethic and stuff. So that is really interesting. So what does a typical day look like for you? You know, because I know you also have your own original music too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it varies pretty wildly depending on kind of what projects I'm working on at the moment. I mean, I'm very fortunate. I have my studio here in my house, which is such a blessing. And I'll usually wake up and walk the dog, work out, have coffee, all that jazz. Try to like get in the headspace where I have the freedom to create. Because
Mm.
something that I also learned so late for me in my songwriting career was that creativity is the highest evolutionary function of your brain. So, like, as an example, if we were cavemen, you're not going to be drawing on the wall if you're like, dude, a saber-toothed
Mm.
tiger is going to come eat me.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, you have to convince your brain somehow that everything is okay and there is no imminent threat to the world.
Interesting. Sure.
And I find like I know a lot of writers who have talked about struggling with writer's block and stuff, and they're running from thing to thing. They wake up, they're immediately thrown into the fray of anxiety of the business and negotiations and splits and politics and all that.
Sure.
And I think that primes you to not want to be creative because you're like, man, I have to deal with all these threats.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, even that one thing you mentioned, like say talk about splits really quickly. Like there have been times where I've been like, like do I want to work with this artist, but like I don't even want to think about like a contract with them and like trying to figure. And then that immediately puts a pin in the bubble of the creativity. Because like, okay, how am I going to have the conversation of it? Do I get 80% and they get 30% because they only wrote the one verse? And it's like then it's just like it becomes awkward. Then it like absolutely. So that's a great point.
Yeah, I mean it's just something. I think that can really be a struggle. And not to go off on a tangent, but I will say briefly to that splits thing. I wish I could go back and take back every time in my career that I ever tried to split a song based on contribution in the room. I wish I could go back. It's one of the few deep regrets that I have. Like, because I think it really cheapens your creativity and takes away the freedom of expression when people start to think, okay, now I have to make sure I put enough words on this paper or enough melodies in the air that I deserve, an equal share of this song. And I think most young writers do it, and I'm guilty. I've done it in my younger days, and I will never do it again. It's like one of my like biggest things I like to pass on is like, don't
How
nickel
would
and
you
dime.
do it now?
I mean, obviously there's limitations to split it evenly in the room because sometimes there's a manager in the room, and then that's kind of a different thing. Or someone brings their girlfriend who just sits there, and like I'm not saying, no offense to the girlfriend, I'm not saying give her an equal share. But when it comes to people who are actually creating and involved in the copyright, man, life is long, and there's many ways where if you have that mentality and somebody pays it back to you, it
Yeah.
will even out over time.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're essentially saying relatively give everybody an equal share, even if they. That is interesting because they also contribute. While they might not have contributed that exact amount of lines or something like that, just being there, they might have sparked. They might have said something that triggered something that you created. You know, that whole new verse based on the one word that they said. You know what I mean? Like that is a great. But that is a great idea. I like that a lot, actually.
And to add on to that, sorry, like
No, no, go
just
for
one
it.
other thing that you can do that I would love to, like a perfect world, and I've done it myself. If you feel like you walk away from a session and go like, man, this person really lifted, like this person carried the team,
Mm-hmm.
I have in those scenarios hit up that person or their team and been like, hey, can you have more than me? Like,
Mm-hmm.
can you, because I don't feel good about taking this from you. I like you brought the magic today, and that song wouldn't have happened without you. And 9 out of 10 times they say no. But if you give someone that level of like
Sure.
trust, I just think it goes so far.
Yeah, man. There's this principle that the more you give out, it always comes back tenfold. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. So, a question for you. We were talking about creating the. This is actually from a subscriber. So shout out to Vanessa that asked this question. They so we were talking about how you said creativity is the highest level of pretty much like humanity, right? And creating a space where there's less threats, right? How do you deal with it once you do all that? How do you personally deal with writer's block?
Um,
Which is
I,
probably the most common question you've ever gotten, but
no, I mean it's every day is different, but I have some overarching principles that kind of guide me. And the
sure.
biggest one is dare to suck. It's start with something bad. And I find a lot of times when I work with writers and we're getting stuck, I'm like, hey guys, can we just start with like I'll say something intentionally terrible. Like that it's like a line we would never use. Something ridiculous or like maybe inappropriate or whatever. It's just something that's like makes people laugh and go like pfft. Because
Hmm.
you start taking this so seriously and it
Yeah,
siphons all of the play out. And creativity and play are just so intertwined.
sure.
So for me, I find when I have writer's block, it's because something is putting pressure,
Hmm.
whether it's conscious or subconscious. Whether I'm thinking like, oh, I don't know, like thinking about money or thinking about the success of a record or something else. There's something that's putting pressure on the creativity, and it's making it go, I need to perform. And creativity does not like that.
Sure. That is a great, great answer to that. And it makes me think of the song by Hootie and the Blowfish, The Hook. Like that, if you ever looked at the lyrics of that song, it is the most wildly written song. Like it makes me as a songwriter be like, what am I doing wrong? That this song is so popular and everybody knows the words to it, but he's literally like talking about how I could sing. His literal words are pretty much like I could sing anything I want as long as the hook is catchy and you guys will sing it back. And it's like, what am I doing? But you're
Yeah.
right. It's that playful, creative aspect that like they kind of got out of it and they wrote a great melody because of it, and now it has a billion streams.
I mean, imagine, and I don't know the number, but imagine how much money Baby Shark has made
Oh
as
my
like,
gosh, sure,
and the
absolutely.
sad thing is, some things that we look at as like these penultimate expressions of musical art are not going to even come close to the amount of money that Baby Shark makes. But I'll tell you
Exactly.
one thing: I bet you they had a great time in the studio writing that
A
ridiculousness.
100%. Absolutely. Another really interesting question, kind of leading off of the writer's block and continuing the writing thing, is what do you prefer, writing about personal experience or like fictional experiences in your head?
I really struggle with writing about fictional experiences because I think the devil is in the details. So
Interesting.
like when you're writing about a real experience, you have the benefit of all the furniture. Like I can ask you, and it doesn't have to be my experience. I just have to find whoever's experience it is, somebody, I'm sitting with a songwriter and they tell a story, and we can kind of grab off of that, and I immediately go, okay, that experience, that emotion that they had, and let's say it's like, losing a loved one, like
Mm.
losing a grandparent. And I go, okay, well, I haven't lost a grandparent of my own, but I did lose my dog when I was 15, and that made me feel this way. And then I start to draw those corollaries. I think when you have that real experience, you just have this wealth of subconscious furniture to draw from around the idea. And you can put in those little specific things. Whereas with a fictional thing, you're kind of making up and inventing this world and your brain's going as fast as it possibly can. But
Interesting.
it's like one of those old Hollywood sets from like the 60s where there's nothing behind the buildings. It's just
Hmm.
like the facades. Like in the same way, I think there's a real depth that goes missing when you try to write about a fictional, like, let's write about a dude in a club, you know?
That is really interesting. Yeah, like that's a great example of you're a metaphor. That's why you're a songwriter, bro. Your metaphors are like top notch, dude. The one that stuck out to me the most that you said so far, I don't even know if you realized it, but you said follow the thread and hope you find a sweater. I'm like, dude, that's a Taylor Swift lyric right there for sure. I'm surprised she had. Like, I'm like, did you take that from a song? Is that from Cardigan or something? You know? Like that was your metaphors are on point, man. So that is so good. How do you find the balance between your own personal craft and writing songs for yourself and writing songs that you end up sending to other people?
That's a great question. For me, everybody's different. For me, the song is king. So I'm always thinking every song, I try to pour my heart into every song as much as I can. And then the question is, where does this song have the best chance and have the best life? And if it's with X artist or if it's on X TV show or whatever, I'm like, okay, great, let's send it there. And if it's like, actually, I think A, I'm really close to this song and it's reflective of what I'm doing with the brand, but B, I think I can give this song the best chance and make sure that it's not radically encumbered or changed away from the original vision, then it's something that I do,
Which kind of plays right back into one of the first things you said, which is the humility aspect of it. Like, if you love a song but you feel like it's gonna do way better with a different artist, that is a hard and humble thing to do. To be like, you know what, this is gonna get a better spotlight over here. I don't have to be the spotlight all the time, kind of thing.
Yeah, so. No, because it's not about that. And also, sure. I have a response. I write alone for my artist project, and that's pretty much the only thing that I write alone for. Usually I'm co-writing, and I have a responsibility to my co-writers because they're doing this full time. And I'm like, look, if you come in and write with me, I'm going to do my best to look out for your interests, make sure that your day wasn't wasted, food's on your table. Like, I got to take care of my people.
Sure, 100%. What is do you have essentially where is your heart for the future? Is it continuing to do songwriting, or do you want to be the artist that's now performing these number one songs, or is it both? Or
I love having an artist project because it lets me put out things exactly the way I hear them in my head.
Interesting.
And I think it's easier. I've also worked with some creatives who really struggle to give up their vision in a songwriting session when it's for an artist. And I think it's a hard-aged, seasoned lesson to learn, to work with an artist and go, hey, listen, I am here to support your vision. I want your creativity to come to life because you have to live with this song for the next 20 years on stage.
Yeah.
I don't, So conversely, I think it's easier for me to walk into those sessions and go, whatever you want, man. You want to just do 4 chords and not change anything? You want to just do, whatever it is? Great, because I scratched that itch on my artist side.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a necessary thing no matter what. But at the same time, if the gods of the algorithmic Spotify universe decide to bless me with another insane experience, I would be even more excited because then I would get to turn around and go, okay, now I can put on all these creatives I love. I can bring in all these musicians I love and do tours and really take care of this, build this whole, machine with all these great people and employ all these people and give these people opportunities to do music and not think about food. It's just a great thing. So I would love to be able to do that.
Absolutely. So then how do you find the balance of pursuing that, but also pursuing the songwriting career?
I think there's kind of just a pendulum effect for me where I'll do a bunch of writing sessions. I'm like, okay, this is really, really fun. Okay, now I kind of want to write some stuff that's sort of weird and get in my own head, and then back and forth.
That's really interesting. I definitely relate to that. Do you find answer this however you best feel fit, but is it ever a struggle that sometimes you write a song and it blows up with a million streams with a different artist, and maybe a song that you write for yourself doesn't do as well?
Not in that sense, because there's so many factors at play that I don't find myself mentally competing with songs I work on that go to other artists, because there's just so much, there's other teams and entities and connections and politics and all that stuff. It's so multifactorial. I can look at it and go, that's apples and oranges. I will say it's hard for me to compete with myself.
Okay.
And psychologically as an artist, I think it's one of the most difficult things is learning how to handle when you have a song come out and it gets 500,000 streams and you're like, yeah, I'm doing all right. And the next song comes out and gets 15,000 streams and you're like, well, I'm getting worse. If you were to graph the trajectory of my goodness, it would be just headed for the floor. Like we all extrapolate those lines and think about the long-term ramifications. It's really tough as an artist, I think, learning to deal with that, and it's something I'm still learning. But yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. I would very much relate to that. I've learned, and I'm sure you've learned this also, but like setting no expectation is the best expectation you could set, because as soon as you expect, like, you know, the first song I ever released, I for some reason thought I was like, I'm gonna get 1,000 streams tomorrow, and I got like 3, and I think 2 of them were myself checking if anybody got a, you know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah.
And you know, like, and like, so it's like as soon as I let go of that, it's like, you know, if this gets 100,000 or if this gets 1, at least I put the song out there. And I at least come from the mentality of like, I put out a lot of content, and including songs. So it's like, you know, if this one's not the one, then the next one will be the one, or the next one. And at some point, just based on sheer probability, there's one in there, kind of thing, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it's something Toby used to always tell me, do your best and never expect anything. And I've kind of modified that slightly into enjoy the process,
Yeah.
never expect anything. Because I think if you're having fun while you're doing it, you're always going to come back to the plate.
That's
But
true.
if you
That's
bury
true.
the fun and you make the fun contingent on results,
That's true.
that's a fickle relationship, man, and it will hurt you over and over.
That is true. That is a great point, man. Because it is fun when you're getting results, and as soon as you don't get the results, it's not usually sometimes as fun. So learning to have fun, even separate of that's a great point. Oh man, that spoke right to me. That would hit me at home.
No, I mean, I think that this profession is one of the most mentally unhealthy professions to be in. Because it's so volatile, and there's so much bad information, and everybody's trying to get you to focus on the wrong things. And, you know, we all develop these mental models to like find ways to survive and ultimately thrive. And I'm learning every day. That's been tremendous for me, you know?
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah, man, it is very important to take care of your mental health for sure, because it sucks sometimes, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, especially the last year too, dude. Like,
sure.
I don't know if you've had the same experience with people you've been talking to, but so many songwriters I've talked to, like really, really good songwriters who've had cuts that are crazy, have admitted to wanting to quit in the last year. And I think it's been a really, really difficult time for musicians, because music is contextualized by togetherness. And we've all been isolated. We've all been alone. And for those of us who've dedicated our lives to this, we're looking at it going,
yeah,
well, what's the point? You know?
Especially with what you said earlier, with the fact of like, now these huge artists that, you know, might not have had the time to write beforehand, you know, are writing their own songs now, or, you know, picking one artist, like you said, or one songwriter, like you said. So now there's not the abundance of work. You put that into the play, you know, there's a lot of factors. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. What is your process? So, for example, like some more recent things, like this was like on the bottom of your list because the discography was going in order of year. So, like some of the more recent stuff you like was like NC 127 or 127, or like Sabrina Carpenter, or like Olivia Rodrigo. Artists like that, or in general, how do you like? What's the ratio of actually working with artists? Because I think people assume, and I assume that it's not the case, but people assume that, you know, if you have a songwriting credit with an artist, that means you were in the studio hanging out with them. And very often that I feel like that's not the case. But what is your ratio, at least what you would say is, you know, actually sitting down working with the artist versus, you know, just kind of writing with a group of artists and sending it to the artist, or that artist end up picking it up?
It depends. It's obviously harder to write a song and send it to an artist and hope that they cut it, because they don't have any emotional investment in it out of the gates. And I find that the artists that want to do that are either it's a specific scenario, like when you're writing for a TV show and you're serving the TV show and they're kind of picking the songs and then the artists are cutting them. That's one thing. Or it's an artist who's on tour and busy, or is kind of a veteran and is going, look, you know, I don't have time to be in 30 writing sessions a day. So they're willing to make that leap. But artists that aren't on that level, like on crazy tours or on TV shows or stuff like that, they generally need to have an emotional investment in the song to want to put it out. So I find overall it's much more successful to sit and write with the artist in the room. With the sole exception probably, or there's a few exceptions. With the exceptions of like K-pop is a little bit less like that, because obviously they're spending 12 hours a day, you know, learning their craft, which is insane. Or DJs who, you know, aren't so much interested in the songwriting and are producing on planes between gigs.
Yeah. Typical, absolutely. That comes right out of any documentary of any DJ you've ever seen.
Yep.
Absolutely. So, an interesting comment about what you said is, so I was speaking with Jerry Flowers, who is the songwriter who works a lot with like Sam Hunt and stuff, and the country scene, and he works with Keith Urban a lot, or Keith Urban is his bassist. He was saying that something very similar, where the veterans are way more likely to accept pre-written songs than the newer people, and I'm curious why you think that is.
Um, I think the more you write songs, like you have to get a certain amount out of your system
Interesting.
before you can really just approach a song like naked without any ego and go, dude, that's an awesome song. I should be singing
Mm,
that song. You know, like there's a certain amount of hubris, and maybe rightfully so, that it comes in at the beginning where people are like, I have to write my artist songs. I'm an artist. I represent these songs. I have to be engaged. And then there comes a point in an artist's career where they're like, I just need to be singing the best songs on earth.
sure, absolutely, absolutely. And if I can't serve that best song, then somebody else can come in and help. Absolutely, I agree with that. But everything tying together again to that humility of being able to kind of let go of your pride of the whole, man, it's so important. I think that the characters is like, and all these conversations I've had, I hope that people get out of this, like, that the thread that kind of ties it all together is the humility to kind of like, I don't have to be the center of attention doing everything myself. The relationships that you build, and just enjoying the process, because otherwise it just becomes miserable.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, it's really, it's a hard career to be in, man. It's a hard career to get traction in too. You really
Sure.
have to find the little nooks and crannies of the business where the walls are lower, you can climb over and don't need, the giant Trojan horse to get yourself through the door.
Yeah.
Um,
If you
yeah.
were starting over today, what would you do today to starting your career?
Uh, I think that the obviously the scene is always changing, and especially
Sure.
post COVID, it's changing even faster.
Absolutely.
Um, Something that wasn't there before when I was starting out that I would totally lean into now is these micro licensing platforms. Something like a BeatStars or like a Splice or something like that. Like there's all these platforms where
Interesting.
there's a very low barrier to entry to put up your work, and people find things on there all the time. You have all these customers who are all looking, and you're starting small. You're starting with guys who are, rapping in their bedroom or doing songs on their, little MXL mic. I don't know what the affordable mic is of the day, and was MXL for me when I started.
Sure. I have one over here from
Perfect.
my old microphone. Absolutely. Before I
Oh
upgraded.
yeah, I think everyone should have an MXL and KRKs. It's
KRKs, yes.
a rite of passage. But yeah, I would lean into that micro licensing stuff because every once in a while lightning does strike on those platforms, and you do have the
Sure.
old town roads that come out of those.
Sure.
Um, but it also just
Yeah.
multiplies the places you can be in and the serendipity that can come from your copyrights.
So are you saying essentially like, okay, so you're talking more of like the licensing then, like actually putting a song up and people like buying it, whereas on Splice though it's more of like, you could like Kashmir for example, like will put up his just tracks or his samples and people now I know Kashmir's name because, is that what you're talking about, like doing something like that?
Yeah, and you can do like, for people who are vocalists, you can do vocal packs, which
Yep.
they always need more of on Splice, and get people acquainted with your voice and getting to think of you as someone who's in the studio with them.
Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. That's an interesting idea. Yeah, you feature Jacob Restituto on a song. You
I mean,
know.
yeah, and the problem with music right now is everything is so long tail revenue. I think it's more than it ever has been, and it's really really hard to get into music because there's no way to get in and start making
Yeah.
a check right away unless you get struck by lightning 400 times in a row.
And if that I've noticing that if that happens, the sustainability of that is so hard. Like
Yeah,
I think TikTok's a great example because while it's super relevant in the music industry, there's so many songs that pop off, and then you never ever hear the artist ever again. You
yeah,
know, and yeah, sure they made a hot buck that time. They probably made decent money. A label picked it up, whatever. They had its 6 month run, but like I think that the hardest thing in anything is actually turning that into something else. So but probably the steady growth is probably the best way to go, and maybe I'm just telling myself that because I haven't been struck by lightning. It's been this slow, steady growth, but
No, man. I mean, I look, I think it's a blessing however it happens. And obviously,
yeah, absolutely.
You think about like a serendipitous moment, and like a lot of the serendipitous moments in my life where like the, timeline, the alternate timeline that I'm on, like radically swung left or right, happened in a 10-minute span. And then you think about the length of your life and how many 10-minute spans there are. Sure, the probability is low, but you're multiplying that over so many 10-minute spans. Lightning's actually going to strike a couple times in your life. The question is, are you going to be outside, drenched, holding an umbrella up, or are you going to be inside like, dang, it's rainy out there, I don't know if I want to go out there,
And open to it. Like you said, some people are just not open to the opportunities because they have this distinct, hard written, this is how I want to do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Look, I would have never seen myself doing this on YouTube. I thought I was going to be a Spotify artist, put my songs out there on Spotify, but it's still going in that direction. But it just, I never thought YouTube would be the route to that. Absolutely. As of 2 years ago, like you would have asked me, never would have thought that.
Yeah, but I mean, that's a testament to your ability to be like water in this case, not to bring it back to that. Like, you got to go where the love is.
I agree with that. Totally agreeing with that statement. Yeah.
And there's so many jobs. People don't think about how many jobs there are in the music business.
Yep.
And people who are killing it actually need a lot of help. So if you come in and you hit up a big producer and you're like, I want to produce songs with you, they're going to probably be like, I don't know. Like, there's so many problems with that. But if you come in and say, hey, like, can I help bounce stems? Or like, I learned Melodyne. I'm really good at Melodyne. Can I help vocal tune? Like,
yeah,
take some of those little tedious things, which are jobs in and of themselves, and say, look, like, can I just start there? And you just like throw me a couple $100.
That is good.
And the other side of that too is like the throw me a couple $100 side, because a lot of people, you give them an inch and all of a sudden the demands are insane. Where it's like, people think, okay, I'm in the music business. I got to fight for myself. I got to like stand my ground, get everything I deserve, blah, 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 blah. And people don't realize it's a serial transactions business. Like, the people who are killing it because they have hundreds of successful copyrights out there. So if you're the wrench in the spanner in the works, or whatever the phrase is, that is clogging up one deal, that's not going to work for them. They can't spend. And I've had a few deals that, take 6 months because people are just obsessing over 0.5% here, 0.5% there,
Absolutely.
It's crazy.
Absolutely. I very much agree with that. Like, kind of relates back to how the fact, like I mentioned, I put out a lot of songs and content. Like, when somebody's like, oh yeah, like it takes them like 6 weeks to finish a song. I'm like, bro, come on. Like, this is a 3-day process kind of thing, or a cover song for YouTube. I'm like, dude, like that's 2 hours max. Like I'm more of a quantity, and I think quality starts to come with the quantity, but and I think quality is subjective. So something that you might like, I might hate, and vice versa. And I think that's kind of why I go for the quantity. But yeah, it is so interesting, man. It is fascinating.
I think you just gotta be easy, and really know that it's all a long game. You're building a tsunami one stream at a time,
Yeah, absolutely. They're all little salespeople for you, and some salesmen do better than other salesmen.
Yeah, man. I mean, like I've gotten to the point now, like while I was working in sync licensing, I was moonlighting for this music licensing company that did mostly reality TV, and they would put a bunch of the stuff that I was making in my college dorm room into reality TV shows, and that stuff is still on The Bachelor to this day. The stuff that I made in college, and my ASCAP paid statements are like 600 pages long, and it's like. Dude, it's hilarious. It's like 30 cents, 70 cents, 40 cents, 70 cents, but it's 600 pages of that.
Yeah. So are you talking more of like the instrumental kind of stuff that like they'll play between scenes and stuff?
Totally. Like the quirky, stringy, all that stuff.
As soon as we get off this live stream, I'm going to tell my wife that you made music for The Bachelor, because she's she's going to love that.
Yeah. No, I mean, it was, and that's another one of those things where at the time, I'd graduated from college. I didn't have a job. Nobody wanted to hire me. And I was like, dang, how do I like create some value during this time? And I was just making all these little terrible sounding like string copyrights. And somehow Josh Young at HU Music was like, yo, I'm going to bless this guy and I'll try. And he ended up getting my stuff in a bunch of these shows, and it's still there, you know?
Do you ever watch something on TV and be like, oh shoot, I wrote that?
I'm not gonna lie to you. I made the stuff so long ago, and also it's rather generic. So
You probably wouldn't even recognize it.
I did that once too recently, where I was like, you know what? I'm gonna watch this show because I know my music's in this show. They let me know, and I watched it. And at the end, I was like, I didn't win.
Oh, that is funny. Well, it was into the quantity of work. You said, you got to put stuff out. The people that succeed are the people that have the most stuff out there. So you just have such a large library of stuff you don't even know. That's hysterical. That's actually really funny. That is really funny. So I think that, and every time we work with different artists, we have all these different stories, right? Do you have one specific story that sticks out to you that you're like, you don't even have to give the artist name, but like that is like a funny, your favorite story to tell people when you're like, oh man, when this happened, you were like, oh, I can't wait to tell somebody about this situation.
Oh man, that's a tough one because like, I mean, there's so many stories, and it's always like a question of like, what is appropriate to share.
Sure. I have a different question if you want to sidecar that one. Because it's almost like a, hey, what's your favorite song kind of question. It's like, well, there's 1,000 songs out there. You know what I mean? So
I will say one moment that was really special for me is I was one of Noah Cyrus's really early writing sessions, like first 20 maybe ever. And we wrote a song, it's a beautiful song, and we were wrapping up. Like the first day, we had half the song written. It sounded like crap. There was nothing there. Like it was a, terrible Logic piano. Like barely a voice memo, and she's like, "Hey, my dad's gonna come in and just listen real quick," and we were like your dad, like
Billy Ray Cyrus.
Your dad? Yeah. It's like, oh god, oh no, and Billy comes in, and he's just, if you're ever in the room with Billy, he's like just this effervescent, just personality, like he just glows. He's just a beautiful soul. He comes in, says hi, super sweet, sits down at the desk. He's like, okay, press play. Sitting there, and I'm sitting back on the couch like, oh my god, this is terrible. Like nothing sounds good.
Sure.
And then it ends, and he's like, play it again. And then we played it again, and he was like, he got all emotional, and he was like, man, this is so good. I'm so proud. And it was just one of those moments where it's like, what you think is terrible.
Sure. Quality is subjective.
Exactly. Might be really special to someone.
Absolutely, because that's one of his daughter's earlier songs. Absolutely. But that is hysterical, man. That is so funny. Yeah. Speaking of actually Noah Cyrus, and that sparked a question in my head. How do these relationships start? Like, how do you, one of your first times working with Noah, say, right? How does that even come about, or any of the other artists that you've worked with?
I mean, it's all definitely about trust and longevity for sure, because, making music is kind of, I don't know how to do this metaphor in a not inappropriate way, but it's almost like a one-night stand in a way, where like you are like becoming emotionally naked with that person like an hour after meeting them. And it's a lot to sit down in a room and be like, here's some of my deepest, darkest secrets,
Sure.
So I think as a result, these artists and songwriters are all protected behind these layers of introduction. And you have to have somebody you have to gain the trust of somebody who then says, you should meet this person. And, I can't say how many people Toby put me on for. Like, that was one of those cases where she came to Toby's studio compound that I was working at, and we met, and a session came out of that. And, in a different life, if I wasn't there and she didn't have that trust with Toby because of his relationship, it probably wouldn't have happened. So it's not something I take credit for, but I think it is something where if you're always thinking, how do I build a relationship with this person where they trust me with their intellectual property and also with their secrets?
Sure. Yeah, both of those are very important. Absolutely. Do you I lost my train of thought with that question. I don't even know where I was going to go with it, but
it's my life in a nutshell.
Yeah, oh gosh, absolutely. For real. That is funny. Oh man. Oh well, I'll follow up with that, and we'll wrap it up in a couple of minutes, because I know that I want to be respectful of your time. The other question that I did have for you is there anything in specific that you recommend artists starting out, or even not even starting out, they stay away from? Things you've seen in the industry that you're like, that's a bad idea, that's a bad deal, that's, you know, a scam, anything like that? It's a broad question, but I'm curious because the reason I ask you, let me give a little backstory. Is that, like, I feel like there's so many of those, like, hey, submit your songs or pay $100 and maybe you can, you know what I mean? Like, your song can be submitted to the Bachelor, you know, stuff like that. I'm curious if there's anything you could say about stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, in general, I think if somebody's asking you to be paid to listen to your stuff, you're getting robbed one way or another. And I did it too, for sure. Like when I was, you know, making music in my dorm room, I was paying $75 on PayPal so that some A&R guy would listen to my song, you know, and it never happened. I think that there's a lot more ways that artists get robbed now because you also have these companies that are doing, you know, hey, pay us whatever and we'll get you all these plays on Spotify. And granted, those plays will destroy your algorithmic optimization and completely ruin the setup for the next release because now Spotify has no idea who your fans are and who to push the music to. But let's not mention that. Let's just take your $500 or whatever and go on their way. So I think that there's a lot of companies like that now that are really, they're taking advantage of artists in that kind of new world. So I would say it's better to have 2,000 real streams than 200,000 fake ones as far as the longevity. Don't pay for streams. I don't really believe in paying for people to listen to your music. I don't know one story of that working out for someone.
Okay.
I think there's different ways to pay. Like, once again, if you do something where you're like, hey, you find a creative you respect and you send them an email like, hey, can I unpaid intern for you and get you coffee or like take your car to Toyota or whatever. Like, that's you paying with your time, but it's you building a relationship and trust, not you being like, hey, here's my money, we're never going to meet, and you can run off and do whatever.
Sure.
And most of the people I know wouldn't accept that anyways, which I don't know what that says about that. But yeah, I would say overall, don't pay for plays, don't pay to be heard. And if there's anything contractual, get a lawyer. Just get a lawyer. Like,
yeah. So that segues perfectly into the question that I did forget. Now I remembered is the do you have management?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So I have management and I also have legal. And it's so funny. I think a lot of people are really I don't want to slam this mentality, but I think people can get really greedy in this business and think, why should I give up, 15 or 20% of my revenue to pay a manager or to pay legal or whatever it is? And granted, they have to do the work for sure. But in no other business does somebody look at their revenue and go, what do you mean I'm only walking with 75%?
Yeah, exactly. Nobody keeps 100% of the gross.
No, you start an ice cream shop and you go, okay, I need to buy product. Yeah. I need to hire employees.
Pay employees. Exactly.
Yeah, I need to have rent. Like, you are in this business where there's no hard cost pretty much.
Yeah.
And you're looking at these employees who, a good manager, and there are few, but a good manager is your salesperson, they're your negotiator, they're your conciliary and your friends and someone who helps keep the mission and the goal in mind. That's invaluable. And you're talking about only walking away with 75% of revenue for that. Don't cheap out on yourself. Hire a team to do things better than you can.
Absolutely. How did you find your manager?
I got really lucky, man. It was just he knew a person at the studio that I was working at, and we kind of got to know each other a little bit. And he sort of was, I knew he was very talented, but I told him to his face, I was like, hey, and once again, me being young and naive, I was like, I don't see the value in a manager, a songwriter. I was like, look, I love you as a person. I love you. And it's great because it's his birthday today. So it's even better than I'm just slamming him right now. But I was like, look, I don't see the value. And he was like, okay, no pressure. Call me if you ever get in trouble. And there was one song that came out with a very high level artist that I can't name.
Sure.
And there was 9 people on the splits and 4 people who came in after the fact who were claiming all this stuff and trying to take all this stuff. And I called him and I was like, I don't know how to solve this. And in a few hours, he had moved heaven and earth. And I was like, okay, see, this is something that I should be hiring someone to do.
Sure. Absolutely. But now, so do the relationships that you end up building with these, say, artists that you work with, is that your managers? Does he or she have a hand in that, or is that a lot of stuff that you do on your own?
It's multifactorial, and things come through different channels all the time. Sometimes I've always been surprised sometimes, like my manager's buddy who's not even in the music business is like, hey, I have this awesome artist that you will want to work with. I'll bring him over. And that happens. Or sometimes I'm working with a songwriter and the songwriter's like, hey, I've been in with so-and-so. Do you want to do a day of the three of us?
Mm-hmm.
But it's wherever it kind of comes from, they all come through these like really tight channels of trust.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the common thread.
Absolutely. So wrapping it up, first of all, I want to say thank you so much for taking the time. I very much appreciate it, you coming on the channel. I think there was a lot, for the people that were watching, I think there's a lot of, and the people that watch after the fact, there was a lot of insight that they can get from this conversation. So thank you for taking the time. And then what is the best way for the people that are watching this now and after the fact to support you and what you are up to these days?
I mean, I'm on all the social medias as some derivative of Josh Cumbee or Josh Cumbee Music. So come say hi. I put out original music every so often with my label, Avex in Japan. They're amazing. If you like it, listen. If you don't like it, tell me what you don't like about it so I can do better.
Absolutely. Constructive criticism. I like it.
Yeah, man. Because I'm always like, at the end of the day, as an artist, we have to serve the creative consciousness. And I always like to get feedback, whether it's good or bad.
Absolutely. As long as somebody's not a jerk.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, don't just tell me it's bad, because that'll just make me sad for like 20 minutes. Yeah, but tell me it's bad because, and I will take that and run with it.
100%.
Like, I think it's just about being engaged with the creative community, and I love being engaged with the creative community. So like, find me on anything, send me your questions or ideas or whatever, like whatever you're thinking about. And I like being a part of this little fabric.
Absolutely. A lot of the links for your social media are already in the description, so people can check that stuff, your YouTube and all. I think your Instagram is both in there. So last question for you, wrapping it up, is what is a song that you have not written that you wish you wrote?
Oh my God. Yes, let's go there. It would be hard for me to choose, but I would say lately, All Time Low by John Bellion was brilliant.
Oh, really? A Long Island boy. Shout out to Long Island, man. That's where I'm from.
Ridiculous. That was amazing. Really? When I heard Tequila by Dan and Shay for the first time, I was like, I hate everything. Like, I don't think I wrote a song for 2 days after I heard that song, because I was like, this is so brilliant. Like, somehow the verse is only like 2 seconds long, and then the chorus comes in, and it's just like nuclear. It's so good.
Yeah.
Insane. Love that. I really, really love, there's this girl, Ashley Kutcher, that just put out the song called If I Could. I'm really into that right now. I've also been into this Spanish artist lately called C. Tangana, who's like incredible if you want to mix it up. There's so much that I'm a fan of, and I'm just like, I listen to it, I'm like, I don't know if I would have made that worse or but I'm just a fan. And not to like turn this into a long answer.
No, please. Hey, I'm loving this answer, so go for it.
I realized a few months ago that I needed to take a step back, like take a couple days and find music that was new that I was excited about. Because I think there's the music that inspired you to start making music, and you always have that, and it's always close to your heart. But there comes a time in your career when you've been doing it for a little while, and you start to hear the stuff coming out, and you start listening to New Music Friday, and you're like, man, no offense, but half of this just sucks.
Sure.
Like, I'm not saying I could do a better song than all of it, but a lot. And what you don't realize is that thought process, even if it's true, breeds this like secret resentment within you, where you start to feel like the game is rigged, and I can do my best work and nothing good will come of it. And I think the cure, like the antidote to that, is to seek out new things that are great. And if you can't find it, you need to start asking people, and ask people, hey, what are you excited about? What are you listening to? Find the artist that maybe didn't make New Music Friday, but still has, a couple million streams in the song, where you're like, holy crap, this is so good. And it just came out, and it proves that new music can come out right now that is just epic and inspiring. And I think if you're
does well.
Exactly. And well, look, it's not Dua Lipa, 600 million streams or whatever, but if you, once again, going back to the serializing thing, if you've got 20 of those going, you're paying your rent.
Yeah. Are you familiar with the artist Russ? RUSS?
I've heard the name, but I have not heard the name.
Okay, so fascinating. conversation really quickly is he talks a lot about that. He has a lot of songs released, and this like he's like like several million a month like listeners on Spotify. Like that's what I love about the internet age is like it's become so segmented. This guy has probably like I don't know like 5 million, 6, 7, 8 million monthly listeners on Spotify, or even maybe even 10 million, like a decent amount. Like where the guy is making, his goal sometime this year is $1 million month based on his streams. Totally. So it's like with all these songs that he has, it's the repertoire that he has, and but the funny thing is like he's got hundreds of thousands or millions of streams every day, but like not everybody even knows his name, which is mind blowing to me because. Like that, it proves the fact that there is so much money to be made, and you don't have to be Dua Lipa or Ed Sheeran or Taylor Swift, and still make $1 million in a month from TuneCore. You know what I mean? Like, because he's not even signed to a label. He was signed to Columbia, didn't like it, dropped out, and this is why it's wild.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
Have you ever worked with Jon Bellion? Because I know that he does a lot of ghostwriting.
No, not yet. I like know people who work with him, but we haven't officially ended up in the same studio yet. So cool. He's on my short list of like people who I'm just think creatively. I love being the dumbest person in the room. I'm
sure, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that.
I have that list of like people who I would feel like an idiot in the room with, and he's definitely on that list.
I love that. That is a great motto to live by. Trying to be always looking to be the dumbest person in the room because there's so much you can learn from it. That is. I love that. That is good. We'll wrap it up on that. So if you could just hang out for 2 seconds, I want to say thank you to everybody that did, made it this far. You guys are the champs for making it this far in the interview, and everybody that watches it after the fact. Thank you so much for watching. Definitely go check out Josh's stuff. Check out his Wikipedia so you can see the insane list of stuff that he has worked on. But thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Josh, for